final knock.
You're standing on the sidewalk outside a building you helped design, brick by brick, over 20 years of your life. The lights are off. There's a padlock on the front door, a notice taped to the glass. Legal jargon, but you've read enough contracts to know exactly what it means. The company is frozen. The assets are seized. And the guy sitting in the rubble, the one who put himself on the cover of a business magazine 6 weeks ago, he's currently on the phone with his lawyers trying to figure out how he became personally liable for $12 million. And you're sipping coffee across the street, calm as still water. Here's the thing nobody tells you about 20 years of building something from nothing. You learn every crack in the foundation, every hidden wire, every tripwire buried in the fine print, because you buried them. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this. I mentored a young man I treated like a son. I handed him opportunity after opportunity. I introduced him to people it took me a decade to earn access to. And in return, he went behind my back, convinced a boardroom full of suits that I was slowing the company down, and walked out of that meeting with my chair, my title, and my legacy project. He had 30 days at the top. Every single one of those days, the clock was ticking. This is the story of how I let him destroy himself.
If you've ever poured everything you had into something, a career, a project, a relationship, and watched someone else take credit for it, this one is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. And if you've ever fantasized about the kind of justice that doesn't require you to raise your voice even once, stick around. Hit like, subscribe, and drop your own story in the comments, because today, karma clocked in early.
Let me take you back. Not to the beginning of the betrayal, but to where it actually starts, the moment I said yes. The year was roughly a decade ago. I was running the strategic partnerships division of a mid-sized infrastructure firm. Not glamorous work, but the kind that matters. The kind that quietly determines whether city contracts get signed, whether development projects live or die, whether the lights stay on in neighborhoods the politicians forget about. I had spent 20 years building what I privately called the Legacy Project. Not an official name, just what I called it in my head. It was a multi-phase public-private development initiative. Think coordinated zoning, municipal contracts, regulatory frameworks, the kind of thing that takes years of relationship building, thousands of hours of legal review, and a very specific understanding of how to navigate local government bureaucracy without getting eaten alive. I'll be honest with you, I liked him immediately. Most people on the outside saw the company. I was the architecture underneath it. Then one spring, we brought in a new cohort of interns. Leo walked in on the first day wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. 24 years old, sharp jaw, sharper smile. The kind of confidence that fills a room before the person does. He had an MBA from a school with a name you'd recognize, a LinkedIn profile full of endorsements from people twice his age, and a way of asking questions that made it seem like he was doing you a favor by listening. I'll be honest with you, I liked him immediately. There was a hunger there I recognized. I'd had it once, at his age. That feeling that you're running slightly ahead of the world, that if you could just get access to the right rooms, you could change everything. So, I gave him access. Over the next 3 years, Leo became my shadow. I brought him into client meetings, not to present, just to observe, to learn the rhythms, the unspoken rules, the way a negotiation changes tone 15 seconds before someone's about to walk. I introduced him to city officials, regulatory bodies, legal partners. I let him sit beside me during the most sensitive stages of the legacy project planning. When he asked questions, I answered them honestly. When he made mistakes, and he made a few, I covered for him quietly and corrected him privately. I treated him like a son. And here's the thing about sons. You don't always see it coming. It happened on a Tuesday. I know because Tuesdays were board meeting days, and I had deliberately arranged to be in a regulatory consultation across town, the kind of thing Leo knew about because I'd mentioned it in passing.
the kind of thing that would keep me occupied, unreachable, and out of the building for most of the morning. I learned afterward, piece by piece, from people who were in that room and felt guilty enough to tell me. Leo had requested a special session with the board. He framed it as a strategic acceleration proposal. He walked in with a polished deck, and I mean polished, the kind you hire a consultant to build. And he presented a streamlined version of the legacy project. Cleaner timelines, more aggressive projections, language about modernizing the approach and removing legacy bottlenecks.
Legacy bottlenecks. He was talking about me. He told the board, calmly, professionally, with charts and everything, that the legacy project had enormous potential, but that its current leadership was risk-averse in ways that were costing the company first-mover advantage. He didn't mention that the reason my timeline was what it was had everything to do with a specific regulatory compliance window that I had spent 3 years quietly engineering. He didn't know about the window because I hadn't told him yet, because he wasn't ready yet. The board, looking at his charts and his confidence and his MBA vocabulary, didn't ask questions they should have asked. They voted. By the time I got back from my consultation and stepped off the elevator, the decision had already been made. My assistant met me in the hallway with a look I still remember, somewhere between pity and horror. HR was already in my office. The head of the board was waiting to have what he called a transition conversation. The company was offering me early retirement, effective immediately.
With a severance package that for 20 years of work was almost insulting. I sat down in the chair across from the board chairman, a man I had personally recruited to that position 6 years earlier, and I listened to him explain, in the careful language of corporate liability, that the company was moving in a new direction. He didn't make eye contact once. I didn't say a word. Here is what I want you to understand about the moment I left that office. I was not angry. I was not devastated. Those feelings came later, in the car, when my hands were shaking on the steering wheel and I had to sit in a parking garage for 40 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. But in that office, in that moment, I was perfectly calm. Because I already knew something Leo didn't. I packed my desk slowly, deliberately. I said warm goodbyes to the people who deserved them. I shook hands with people who wouldn't meet my eyes. And before I left, I did something that everyone, including Leo, would later interpret as a gracious professional gesture. I handed over the master files, all of them. Everything I had built. 20 years of contracts, amendments, correspondence, regulatory submissions, permit applications, legal briefs, and interagency memoranda. Thousands and thousands of pages, meticulously organized in a shared drive that I transferred full administrative access to Leo personally. I even wrote him a note. I told him the filing structure might take some getting used to, but everything he needed was there. I wished him well with the project. I meant it, in a way, because buried deep in the archive, in a subsection of a folder labeled Regulatory Compliance Phase 3 Addenda, was a contract clause I had spent 18 months carefully negotiating with the city. A protection clause. A failsafe I had built in because I knew, in my 20 years of experience, that a project of this scale could attract political interference. It was designed to protect the project under certain conditions. But like all powerful tools, it was double-edged. If the project moved forward outside of a very specific procedural sequence, a sequence that required a particular city agency sign-off during a particular compliance window, the clause would trigger automatically. Not immediately, not dramatically. It would take about 30 days for the bureaucratic machinery to catch up. But when it caught up, it would freeze every asset tied to the project. And because Leo had signed off on the accelerated timeline as CEO, he was personally exposed. Leo's ego, I knew, would not allow him to actually read the fine print. He was a big picture person. He had people for details. And those people, unfortunately, were not me. I left the building, got into my car, and drove home. The clock started.
Days 1 through 10. Leo was everywhere. I saw the press release the day after I left. New CEO to accelerate landmark development project. A photo of him at a podium, looking every inch the youngest CEO in the city. He gave interviews. He appeared on a local business podcast. He started posting on LinkedIn, long, reflective posts about vision and boldness and knowing when to move fast. I'm told he had the corner office redecorated. I did not follow any of it closely. I had other things to do. I had phone calls to make, meetings to schedule. A boutique consulting firm doesn't build itself. Day 15. Someone who still worked at the company, let's call her a former colleague who owed me a favor, sent me a message. Casual, brief. There's been some kind of audit flag, nothing serious yet. Leo's team is handling it. I smiled when I read that. Not cruelly, just the quiet smile of someone who has watched a very specific gear begin to turn. The flag was from the city's infrastructure compliance office, a routine automated trigger, the kind that gets generated when a permit application is submitted outside the procedural sequence. Leo's team, working at the accelerated pace he had demanded, had filed for a key permit without first securing the sign-off from a particular regulatory subcommittee, the same subcommittee I had spent a year and a half cultivating a relationship with.
They filed the wrong form, in the wrong order, during the wrong window. Leo, from what I later heard, was told it was a minor bureaucratic hiccup, nothing to worry about. They'd sort it. Day 25. It was not sorted. The clause triggered. It didn't happen with a phone call or a dramatic announcement. It happened quietly, a legal notification generated automatically by the contract, forwarded to the city's legal office, forwarded to the company's legal office, and then, quite suddenly, to every major stakeholder connected to the project. All assets tied to the legacy project were frozen, pending a full compliance review. The project was in breach of contract with the city, and because the board had handed full executive authority to Leo, and because he personally signed off on the accelerated timeline without conducting the due diligence his role required, he was personally liable. $12 million.
My phone rang on a Sunday evening. Leo's name on the screen. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked up. He didn't say hello. He just said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, I need you to come in. I need your help. This compliance situation. There's something in the files I can't find, and if you could just... I told him to meet me the next morning. Not at the office, at the coffee shop across the street. I arrived first. I ordered a black coffee. I sat at a table by the window where I could see the building, my building, with its padlock not quite yet on, but its future written clearly in the faces of the people rushing in and out. Leo arrived 12 minutes late. He looked like he hadn't slept. His suit was immaculate. Leo always had an immaculate suit, but there were shadows under his eyes and a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. He sat down across from me and started talking immediately. The words came fast. Technical details, legal terms, urgency. He needed me to explain the clause. He needed me to talk to the city contacts. He needed me to fix it. I waited until he was done. Then I said, calmly, Leo, I didn't sabotage you. I gave you everything you needed, all the files, all the knowledge. I even wrote you a note. Then I stopped holding your hand. You stole a project you didn't understand. He stared at me. I took a sip of my coffee. The clause was designed to protect the project from political interference. You moved the project outside the window it was designed for. That's not sabotage, that's consequence. He asked me if there was anything I could do. I told him, honestly, that the compliance window had passed, the breach was filed, the review was underway. There were better-equipped lawyers than me to handle what came next. I finished my coffee, I stood up, I shook his hand, firmly, the way I'd shaken it when he first joined the company as an eager 24-year-old intern with a too expensive suit. And then I walked out.
The board fired Leo within the week. The vote was unanimous, the same board that had voted unanimously to hand him my chair 6 weeks earlier. Funny how quickly a boardroom full of bold, visionary thinkers becomes a boardroom of people pointing fingers when the assets freeze. They sued him for gross negligence. The personal liability exposure held. His lawyers were good, but the contract was airtight. I know because I wrote it. The youngest CEO in the city made the news again, but not for the reasons he'd hoped. The business podcast that had interviewed him removed the episode. His LinkedIn posts stopped. Meanwhile, I had spent those 30 days quietly. I had incorporated my boutique firm. I had made 3 phone calls to 3 clients who had been with the legacy project from the very early stages, people who had worked with me personally, people who knew where the real knowledge lived. All 3 of them signed with me within 2 weeks of Leo's freeze. The boutique firm, by the end of its first quarter, was profitable, not dramatically, not spectacularly, but solidly, quietly, sustainably, the way things built on real foundations tend to be. And the legacy project itself, it entered a legal limbo that would take years to resolve. All that acceleration, all those aggressive timelines, all that first-mover advantage, frozen. Exactly where it would have been if I had stayed and moved at the careful, deliberate pace that 20 years of experience had taught me was the only pace that actually works. Sometimes the tortoise doesn't need to do anything dramatic. Sometimes you just need to let the hare run. I want to be careful about something here. I'm not telling you this story to celebrate cruelty. I didn't engineer Leo's downfall. I didn't plant a trap. I built a protection mechanism into a project that needed one. I left it in place when I left, and then I watched someone who thought he knew better than everyone in the room learn, the expensive way, that arrogance is not the same as expertise. The hardest part of this whole story wasn't the betrayal. It was the packing, the standing in your own office and putting 20 years of work into a cardboard box while someone else sits in your chair. But here's what I learned. When you've built something real, truly real, they can take your title and your office and your corner window. They cannot take your knowledge. They cannot take your relationships. They cannot take the 20 years of understanding that lives in your bones and your instincts. Ambition is a tool. In the right hands, it builds things. Arrogance is a trap, and it springs itself. Leo was a talented young man who made a catastrophic mistake. I hope, genuinely, that he learns from it. That's what mentors are supposed to want for their protégés, even the ones who forget who taught them everything they know. If this story gave you that slow, deep exhale of justice, you know the one. Smash the like button, subscribe for more stories exactly like this one, and share your revenge story in the comments below. I read every single one, and the best ones might just end up in the next video. Click the next story in the box on your screen. I promise it hits just as hard. I'll see you there.